The town of Blackwood had one rule: never enter the forest after dark. The town was wrong. No cars, no voices, the air stank of rot. He turned in circles, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. He had made it back, hadn't he? Then he saw them. People. Standing in the streets. But they weren't moving. Just standing perfectly still, their faces pale, their mouths slightly open. Mark stepped closer, his footsteps echoing too loud in the silent town. Then he saw their eyes. Black, empty. And their mouths were whispering. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. Mark ran. Nowhere left to go. He sprinted to his house. The front door was open. His parents, he needed to see his parents. He stormed inside, his heart pounding. Mom, Dad? Silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the kitchen. Mark swallowed hard and stepped forward. The light flickered as he peered inside. His parents stood at the table. Not eating. Not speaking. Just standing. Whispering. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. His mother turned toward him. And smiled. Her mouth stretched too wide, her lips curling unnaturally as she took a step forward. Mark backed away. Mom! Her eyes were gone. Just black pits where they should have been. A shadow moved behind her. Something huge, tall, wrong. And Mark finally understood. The forest wasn't just taking people. It was replacing them. The end of everything. Mark ran. Out of the house, down the street. But there was nowhere left to go. The town was covered in fog now, thick and unnatural. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on him. The forest was everywhere, its trees twisting up through the pavement, its roots bursting through the walls of buildings. And the people? They were waiting. Standing, watching. Whispering. Not enough. Not enough. Mark turned, breath shaking. The trees moved. And from the dark spaces between them, something stepped out. Tall, wrong. Its body too thin, its limbs too long, its smile too wide. It reached toward him. And whispered. Now, you are enough. The last thing Mark saw was the town disappearing into the trees. And the last thing he felt was his own skin changing. They never explained why. No signs, no warnings, just whispers from old folks and the uneasy stares of those who had lived there long enough to know better. But rules exist to be broken. The Dare, Ethan, Mark, and Lisa were tired of the town's superstitions. They were teenagers, not little kids scared of ghost stories. So when Mark dared Ethan to step into the woods at midnight, he did. Lisa followed. And, of course, Mark had to prove he wasn't afraid either. They laughed as they crossed the tree line, their flashlights flickering against the towering pines. The air smelled of damp earth, but something about it felt wrong. Like the forest was watching. The first sign, the deeper they went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of dead leaves beneath their feet. Then Lisa stopped walking. Guys, her voice was barely a whisper. Where's the way back? They turned. The path was gone. Only trees, tall, endless trees. They weren't lost. The forest had moved. The whispers. Mark waved his flashlight around. Relax, we came straight in, we just go straight back. Then they heard it. A whisper. Not words, just sounds. Right behind them. Lisa screamed. They turned and saw her flashlight on the ground, but Lisa was gone. Just gone. No sound, no struggle, like she had never been there at all. Then Ethan's light flickered. And Mark saw something move between the trees. Not alone. Ethan ran first. Mark followed. Branches slashed their arms, their legs, but they didn't stop. They ran and ran until their lungs burned. Then Ethan tripped. Mark reached to help. Something yanked Ethan into the dark. Mark barely saw it. A hand long, thin fingers, skin stretched too tight over bone, grabbing Ethan's ankle, dragging him into the underbrush. Ethan didn't even have time to scream. Mark didn't move. Didn't breathe. His flashlight shook in his hands. Then, slowly, the forest whispered again. Not enough. Mark ran. No escape. Somehow, he made it back. He burst from the trees, gasping, falling onto the pavement near the town's edge. His relief lasted 2 seconds. Because when he looked up, the town was wrong. The buildings were rotting, their windows black and empty, the streetlights flickered, and there was no one outside. Not one person. Mark turned to look at the forest. It was closer. The trees had moved. Creeping forward. Swallowing the town. And in the shadows, something smiled. Because Mark hadn't escaped. He had just brought the forest with him. Mark stood frozen. His chest rose and fell in ragged, desperate gasps. Mark didn't die. His friend, the girl, turned to run. But the trees had already moved, blocking her escape. The hollow ones surrounded her, their whispering growing louder, their stretched mouths grinning too wide. Mark watched as she collapsed to her knees, sobbing. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that she was already gone. The forest grows. The new boy stopped screaming. His body twitched, his skin stretched, his eyes turned black. And then, he stood. His lips parted. And he whispered with them. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough, the girl begged. Please, let me go. Mark tilted his head. Once, he would have felt something. Now, he only felt hunger. The trees creaked, the branches stretched. The girl screamed as roots wrapped around her arms, her legs, her neck. The last thing she saw was Mark's empty, smiling face. And then, she was gone. The final horror, the hollow ones turned, their black eyes gazing toward the distance. Another town. Another place to feed. Mark felt the forest shift beneath him, moving closer, creeping toward the next victims. Because the truth was simple. The forest would never stop growing. The hollow ones would never stop whispering. And there would never be enough. You said, he should have. He wanted to. But instead, his body changed. His skin stretched too tight, his bones grew thin, his fingers elongated, he felt his face warp, his mouth widen into something unnatural. The pain was unbearable. And then, it was gone. Because Mark was no longer Mark. The whispering ones, he opened his black, empty eyes. The town was gone. Nothing but trees now endless, ancient, whispering. He was not alone. They stood with him. The others. His parents, Lisa, Ethan, all of them. No longer human. Their heads tilted, their hollow mouths moving in unison. Not enough. Not enough. Mark felt his own lips part. And he whispered with them. The new hunt. Time passed. Days? Years? Mark didn't know. He only knew the hunger. They needed more. One night, the forest opened again. A new town, new people. A boy and a girl dared each other to step into the trees. Mark saw them. Smelled their fear. The others moved beside him, stepping silently between the trunks. The boy turned, eyes wide. Too late. Mark reached out. His long fingers curled around the boy's wrist. And he smiled. Now, you are enough. The screaming lasted only a moment. Then the whispering began again. And the forest grew. The new boy screamed as the forest swallowed him whole. The hollow ones moved. Mark felt nothing, no fear, no hesitation, only hunger. The next town was already rotting before they arrived. The sky above it dimmed. The wind carried whispers no one could hear until it was too late. The people went to bed in one world. And woke up in another. The vanishing. It started with the children. They stared too long at the woods, their eyes glassy, their lips moving in silent whispers. Then came the parents. One by one, they stood in their doorways. Still. Breathing, but wrong. At midnight, the streetlights flickered. At 12:01, the first house collapsed into roots and vines. At 12:03, the screams began. A town with no name. By sunrise, there was nothing left. The streets were gone. The houses swallowed. The people? Standing among the trees, their eyes black, their mouths whispering. Not enough. Not enough. Mark turned. He saw the world itself shrinking. The forest expanding. More towns, more people, more to take. The whispers were getting louder. Because the truth was finally clear. This wasn't about one town. Not even about one forest. This was about everything. The hollow ones wouldn't stop. Not until there was nothing left but trees and whispers. Not until the entire world was gone. Not like people, not like animals. They drifted, silent as shadows, their bodies bending, stretching through the trees. Mark no longer knew if he had feet or if he was just part of the forest now. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the next town. The next meal. The town's last night. It started the same way. A whisper in the wind, a dare. A boy and a girl, curious, laughing, walking into the dark. They didn't even notice the town behind them beginning to rot. Their parents didn't hear the whispers. Their neighbors didn't see the shadows stretching toward their windows. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. The trees moved. The roots burst through the pavement. Houses cracked open, as if something inside was trying to get out. And then the people? They stopped moving. Standing in the streets, staring. Their eyes turned black, their mouths opened. And they whispered, "Not enough. Not enough. Not enough." The end of the world. The hollow one stood at the edge of the forest. Mark watched as the town vanished, devoured by the trees. A new hollow one stood beside him. The boy, the one who had walked in laughing. Now his skin was stretched too thin, his smile too wide, and his whisper joined the rest. Not enough, the forest groaned. And in the distance, another town appeared. Another place to feed. Because the truth was worse than anyone had ever imagined. The forest wasn't cursed, the forest was hungry. And it would never stop growing. The hollow ones drifted forward, silent as the trees themselves. The hollow ones stood at the edge of the world. No land, no sky, no time. Just the emptiness left behind. But hunger never dies. The first whisper, in the vast, silent void, a sound stirred. Faint as a dying breath. Not enough. Then, a root curled through the darkness. A single, twisting tendril of something not alive, but not dead. Something waiting. The cycle begins again, the void shuddered. From nothing, a world bloomed. A new earth, a new sky. A new forest. The hollow ones had destroyed everything. But something had remained. A seed, a whisper, a hunger. And when the first humans stepped onto this newborn world, gazing in awe at the towering, ancient trees, the trees whispered to them. Come closer. Come inside. Come feed the forest. And far beneath the roots, something smiled. Because this time, the forest would get it right. There was nothing left behind them, just trees, endless and suffocating, stretching in every direction. The last town was gone. The last people had changed. And now, the whispers had nowhere else to go. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. But there was nothing left to take. Nothing left to feed on. And for the first time, the hollow ones hesitated. The hunger remains, the forest twisted. Its roots shuddered, its trees groaned, stretching upward, reaching for something beyond the sky. The hollow ones turned their black eyes to the void. Their whispers grew louder. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. And then, they looked at each other. Mark understood what would happen next. The hunger would not stop. Could not stop. They had taken everything. And now, there was only one thing left to consume. Themselves. The final horror. One by one, the hollow ones began to twist. Their bodies stretched apart, their skin peeled like paper, their whispers turned into screams. Mark felt his own limbs fold inward. Felt the hunger turn on itself. The last whisper that escaped his lips. Not enough. And then, there was nothing. No world, no trees, no sky. Only silence. The hollow ones had devoured everything. Even themselves. And in the empty blackness where reality once was, a new whisper began. Soft, faint, the first voice of a new hunger. Because the forest, there was nothing.